You're listening to the Trade Show Insights Podcast, Season 20, Episode 5. I'm your host and exhibit marketing strategist, Marlis Arnold, bringing you tools to improve your exhibit results. On today's episode, brought to you by the Exhibit Marketers Cafe, we're diving into the topic of ROI and how both exhibitors and show organizers can put it into context and really boost those overall results. Well, I am excited today because I'm having one of my trade show BFFs here on Trade Show Insights, Rich Vallaster, and we do these calls every so often. I mean, we kind of say quarterly, but sometimes just life gets in the way, and we don't get together as often as we like. But we talk about all different kinds of where the industry's going, what's happening, what's hot, all that kind of stuff. I've had Rich on the podcast once before, but I wanted to have him back. We're going to talk about some different things, some things that are definitely hot in the industry right now. But I want to give him a formal introduction for those of you who don't know him. Rich Vallaster is the Director of Industry Relations and Community Engagement at Personify, and he's also known as the Trade Show Wonk. He's currently serving as the Center for Exhibition Industry Research Council Chair, and he's also an active member of the International Association of Exhibitions and Events, or IAEE, and the American Society of Association Executives, ASAE. He frequently speaks at to association organizers, exhibitors, and attendees at events such as IAEE's Expo, and he also teaches in the CEM program as well. And one of my favorite things, he also wrote the foreword for the updated edition of Build a Better Trade Show Image.
Well, thank you for having me, and well done on all those acronyms and getting all that out in one fell swoop. So I appreciate that.
It's funny. It's like there's all the industry acronyms. I had somebody ask me, I can't even remember what it was. Somebody asked me just the other day, well, what does blah, blah, blah stand for? And I'm like, let me think about that. Because you refer to them all the time with the acronyms, and it's like, what is the actual name of that association?
Yeah. Well, that's it. Sometimes you're like, what does the one letter in this stand for? Because we say it in such a way. So no. Well, thanks again for having me. Excited to be back, and like you said, I always enjoy our banter and chats, and what we see on the front line. So
yeah. So this is kind of it's going to be kind of our typical flow of how we have a conversation, and everybody else just kind of gets to be a fly on the wall. But you've had a couple of recent articles in TSNN, and I think that we need to really address some of these issues. So one of them, and I know this is really kind of a controversial one that you wrote, are trade shows worth it? And I know you were taking a specific approach on that, talking about what was your angle on that?
Well, really, thinking about, we work with so many exhibitors and sponsoring companies that are backed by private equity, and that really creates a different angle that I don't think most people understand. So I wanted to bring that perspective, and I will leave nameless how that article got started, because it was born out of frustration of working with a particular association. But I realized, and I've got so much feedback on that article, again, controversial, but I think it's really important to think about this subset of your exhibitors and sponsors.
Well, and honestly, you wrote it for the private equity angle, but I think these days, especially, with the talk of tariffs and rising costs, and of course, then there's the whole issue of all the, back end stuff that keeps going up, like drayage and show services and all that. So, I mean, really, it's becoming a question for a lot of exhibitors. And so I think we need to talk about, obviously trade shows need to be proving their ROI in order for people to keep exhibiting, both from an exhibitor perspective and from a show organizer perspective. If the ROI is not there, then our industry is going to start, what do I want to say, crumbling.
Struggling, yeah. I mean, well, I mean,
Struggling.
and I think that's, even that ROI term is, what does that really mean? And when I sat down and wrote that, it was thinking that, one, ROI can mean something different for every company exhibiting
True.
or sponsoring. And that's tough. And that's, I think, the job on the show organizer. And, we like to think that we just sort of do one for all. And I think we're going to have to start to have, more and more conversations with what does ROI look for you? And as in your company, your sponsorship, your exhibiting. And again, I had a hard time writing. I'm a trade show guy by heart. And then to basically, pose that question. But I also, we exhibit as a company at events, all the time. And I'm the one making the final budget call on events. And I talk about measuring the immeasurable. And sometimes it's really hard to say, you know, how can I look at this in a way that, other than leads or other than certain things that make it really easy on a spreadsheet? How do you
Yeah.
measure brand awareness? How do you measure engagement with, and those are things that are a lot harder to put on a spreadsheet, but more and more companies, whether they're PE backed or not, are looking for hard numbers to say, per dollar, I got this. And that's tough.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also a challenge because the people who are on the front lines, who are actually involved in going to the shows, working the shows, dealing with the leads, all that kind of stuff, are not necessarily the ones that are in the accounting office that are tabulating all of these kinds of things. So sometimes there's a breakdown, I think, between them being able to demonstrate, hey, this is what we got out of this trade show, this is why it's worth it to us, and then this other you know accounting person seeing that's like, well, we're not seeing the apples to oranges, the A to Z following the money,
Yeah.
basically. There's the issue of long sales cycles. You can't, and I always tell exhibitors, you can't expect to see ROI in the first 2 weeks after a show. It's just not realistic unless you're at a show and you're actually physically selling products at the
Yeah.
show. That's different. But if you're there to get leads or build brand awareness or introduce a new product or all that kind of stuff, you're not going to see results in the first 2 weeks. You're not even going to see results necessarily in the first couple of months. And so it's really hard for the trade show team to prove their ROI. And sometimes it's even lifetime value. It's like, okay, we met this person at ABC show 2024, and by 2030 they've produced X million dollars worth of business. But the accounting person doesn't look at it like that. So how do you try to justify the ROI and measure in that way?
Yeah, I mean that you brought it right. There's so many ways to measure it, and unfortunately, I think for most organizers, the window for which we judge success, or we have a post event meeting, is too quick.
Yeah.
And not only, like you said, not only not measuring the lifetime value, we're measuring. I mean, I think part of that article was written around too, how, again, not just private equity companies, but they're looking at, if I spend a marketing dollar today, how quickly am I going to get 3 back, 5 back, 10 back?
Mm-hmm.
Because I spent the dollar today, I spent it this year, I want to know how quickly. And to your point, sales cycles, and so that's really hard to say. When you look at something like, we all face this in the trade show business. Well, pay-per-clicks ad, I spent 68 cents and I knew right away because they clicked on a demo form, or whatever the outcome is. It's easier, to your point, that the bean counters, the folks that are looking at the spreadsheets, it's a much easier, like you said, it's a journey, right? They did this,
Mm-hmm.
they did this and this, and it happened in such a shorter window. So when I look at trade shows, you just have to start looking at other factors. How many clients did we engage with, how many prospects we engage with, how much revenue do they represent as a current client that we got to engage in person. And I mean, so you
Yeah.
have to start to put more context. And even
Mm-hmm.
that context sometimes isn't exciting, because the marketing dollar isn't going to make, like you said, 3 tomorrow. And I think that's harder where there are other elements out there that make it quicker. And again, I am no way suggesting that we're going away. I think we'll continue to grow, but we'll have to sort of talk to exhibitors and understand like how are they measuring it, and then set, to your point, realistic expectations.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's a big part of it too, is that exhibitors go into it with unrealistic expectations. They think they're, because I talk to exhibitors all the time, and they always expect that, oh boy, we're going to go to the show, and it's like it's almost like they think it's like a magic genie lamp. It's like, oh, we're going to go to the show, and just magically our business is going to 3x, 5x,
Yeah.
10x. And it's like, no, it's not like the Staples easy button. It's like,
Well, and it's to your point, I often talk. I mean, I have a trade show boot camp I take all our sales team through, and and you're always inspiration, and I point to you too, because you talk to so many. I've even taken it now, even with our own teams, to say, like, at the end of the day, when we go back and recap and say, like, hey, if we're just looking solely at something like leads, if that's our success measure, it shouldn't be the only success measure, obviously.
right.
But if you were to divide that over the cost of, even what did it cost to just exhibit,
Mm-hmm.
not all not all the cost of the human, like when you start to say you divide that by cost per lead, and sometimes people go, oh, and now you see why too. I go back, and so some of that historical data I show people, I'm like, now you understand why it's so important to engage at the booth and not wander off, and not
Yeah,
do all the things that as in your book talk about, that mistakes that
exactly.
exhibitors make. But there's more and more pressure on both sides to train that team to say, hey, you've got to go and activate at this show, or you're not going to be successful. And success isn't in always on a spreadsheet, and success isn't the next day.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, I think a lot of it is just that they don't understand. They don't have a full picture of what all of the things that they're doing really mean. I can remember way back years ago when I was doing training for a national sales meeting for a company, and they were telling me, I said, okay, so what's your goal? They were going to this huge, the big, one show of the year that's like everybody's there. And so I said, what's your goal for the show? How many leads do you want to get? And they were like, oh, well, we've been going to this show forever. Everybody knows us. And, we just kind of go to connect and, make sure we stay in front of people and stuff. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. You're going to spend $250,000 to go, and you don't have a goal. You're just there because everybody else is there. And so once they really started to unpack that, then they set a goal, and then they actually exceeded their goal at the show. But because they didn't have focus, and they were just kind of like, oh yeah, well, we just go, and this is kind of like our reconnect with everybody. Like we always laugh about it. It's like going to your high school reunion, when you
Yeah.
go to a trade show. But it's like, if you don't have a purpose and you don't have a goal, how are you ever going to have any clue whether you actually were successful or not?
Well, and if you're not, it is really funny, because you talk to a lot of exhibitors and they don't have a goal, or they don't have a really defined goal. The organizations and the companies are going to start to create those goals for you, and they're going
Yeah.
to start to say, yeah, if I invest X in this show, I expect Y to come out. And so it is better for people to start thinking of those goals, than, because someone else on the spreadsheet side of the business is going to say, okay, we've now decided what we expect from you.
Yeah. And
And
it may or may not be in line with
yeah, it may not align with reality.
yeah, exactly. Well, I think another piece of it is too, because a lot of companies, they don't have a really good system to track. We talked about how it's not instant, it's a long-term ROI. And if they don't have a system where they can really track that, have tags in their CRM or whatever, where they can see, oh, look, this, we just won this, $2 million contract, but this is a contact that we made at the 2024 ABC Expo or
Yeah.
whatever, then they can see, oh yeah, this is paying off over time.
Well, and that we look at that as an influence as well. Like, the trade
Mm-hmm.
show, may or may not have been the first time we met them. It's great if it is, but there may be influences along the way. Like, hey, we connected with them in 23, we saw them again in 24, and finally in 25, this is when it really hit for us. And so that's
Yeah.
a good point to think about, that events can have a lot of influence, and that may take over time. And if you don't have the proper tools to say, wow, we engaged with this one prospect here, 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 and here, I think that's where we'll find all of our marketing efforts, are different touch points. And that's, again, it's a sophistication and a level that either you start to strive towards, or someone on the Excel side of the business is going to, dictate that for you.
Yeah. Well, and even things like, oh, we met them at the 2023 show, and then they attended a couple of our webinars that we hosted. And then, then they were at the 24, they came to our booth again, 24 or whatever. So you can like see all of those connecting points of what's, driving this person down the road to become a customer or to become a bigger customer. So kind of let's flip and talk about what are some of the things that show organizers could do to help their exhibitors, because I think that show organizers, and you and I've had this conversation many times, but a lot of show organizers are like, they take the check and say thank you, and that's about the end of the conversation with their exhibitors sometimes. So what can they do to really help their exhibitors?
I mean, for one, it starts with not always asking for money. I think it's important to, build those relationships and stay in touch. And like, every time you reach out shouldn't be about money,
Mm-hmm.
because then you're known for that. The more you can start to think about, like, what is their ROI? What are they looking for? Because then you're going to know, can you even deliver on that? Do you need to reset expectations? Do you need to help them and say, well, if that's what you're trying to accomplish, let me recommend this or that. You may guide them into other opportunities or sponsors.
Exactly.
But if you don't ask those questions, you're not going to know the answer. You're just going to, most likely, when they don't renew or rebook, you're like, why didn't they come back? Well, we didn't meet their goals, whether they were
Mm-hmm.
reasonable or not, if you didn't have a chance to guide it. I think the other big thing I'm seeing is that, shows, like you see, you've brought up tariffs and cost increases and, those sort of things. I mean, I'm hearing more and more exhibitors are saying, like, I was going to go to this trade show and show this XYZ merchandise or whatever it may be, product, but if it's not on a boat, and by now it may get tariffed, and so I don't want to
Yeah.
talk about pricing. And so that's creating, I think, this fear, depending on where you source product or where it is in the supply chain. You're a little leery to be at a trade show saying, hey, we have this, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
or maybe it costs this much, or maybe it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, and what you were talking about is helping the exhibitors see how, all the different ways they might be getting ROI. I had a conversation with an exhibitor recently, and he was telling me, he's like, yeah, we're not sure if we're going to go back to this show. And he was explaining why. And as we began to talk through things a little bit, basically what he's offering is not like a product, a widget, as something, he provides a service. And so it was, a lot of it was that people weren't really understanding what he did, and so they didn't come and talk to him in the booth. And I said, why don't you propose doing a session,
Yeah.
teaching a session? And it happened to be, we had the conversation like 2 or 3 weeks before the session deadline, the proposal deadline. And I said, you need to get on this right now and submit a proposal for next year's show, because I think that could really help you get in front of people, because the people that are interested will come to your session, and then they'll be interested and they'll come back to your booth and talk to you more. And he's like, oh, I never thought of that. So again, it goes back to having that conversation with the exhibitors and helping them see, oh, if this is what you're wanting to achieve, maybe you need to consider this, or, being, having something in the new product showcase, or, all of those kinds of things. But if the show organizer is just, oh, thank you for your check, and we'll see you in booth number 1015, then
Well, and that goes back to, I think there's a misunderstanding a lot on show management part when you see an exhibitor in your show and they've exhibited for 50 plus years. I mean, even 5 or more years.
yeah.
The assumption is that they figured it out, they know what they're doing, they've got it. But the person that's suddenly, managing the booth presence, or the head of the sales, or like you said, half the time the people that are on the show are not the ones that book the booth. And so there's a lot of new people in the industry or in the roles that are making these decisions to come to your show. and we treat them like longtime exhibitors, and assume we know what they want and they know what we know what they need, and move on, versus saying, hey, I may have a new contact and I want to re-educate you in our
Mm-hmm.
show, because they're oftentimes the quickest to pull out, because they're like, you haven't taken the opportunity to sort of educate them about your show.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And you can't assume that they just know. I mean, I've had exhibitors come up to me after a workshop and say, thank you so much. I've been exhibiting not only at this show, but all kinds of shows for like 10 years, 15 years. Nobody's ever offered me this kind of education before. And so I think, show organizers tend to think that, oh, exhibitors know what they're doing. They do this all the time. Maybe they offer a new exhibitor workshop for their first time exhibitors, but like you said, just because somebody's been going to some company has been going to that show for 20 years doesn't mean it's been the same people for
Yeah,
20 years.
yeah. Well, and back to even tariffs and cost increases and the chaotic nature of the world that we're in right now, I think the more we as show organizers can start to work with our vendors and partners and whatever to minimize some of those impacts, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's, again, like there's a percent lock-in increase, or things that you can start to say, like, hey, we've worked hard to try the best we can as show management on the cost we can control. We can't control tariffs, but
Right.
when you come to our show, we're gonna try to contain as much as we can. And I think the other thing that would behoove show managers, I know you talk to exhibitors a lot, and I tend to do it in the sales offices. We do rebook, but it's I feel like there's always levers, right? And some organizations and associations say, like, we're always afraid to increase. Well, then, like, at some point, the Excel side of the business or association or whoever comes
Yeah.
and says, no, we need to raise X amount. And then suddenly we push that lever of a price on an exhibitor and it jumps 10%, 15%. And when you talk to most exhibitors, they're like, I understand prices increase. That's the reality we live in. I just can't make a jump 15%. If you
Yeah.
had done 2% over the past 5 years, or three over, do the math, that is a much more tolerable experience. Everyone expects that, but it's these associations that just wait and then push the lever too hard.
Well, and like you said, the transparency of it, it's like, okay, here's why we're increasing the price, or here's what we're going, and there's always things that organizers can add to add value that doesn't really cost anything. I mean, so it's like, so you gotta raise the price, but what could what other little thing can you throw in that's not going to cost you much of anything that would be, you know, that would show the exhibitors that you care.
Well, and then I think it's a combined effort. I mean, there's moments, so I hear a lot from show organizers, and they're worried about cost too, and I think it's where you can get creative in looking at, like, I look at most show floors, at the reception time, and I see show organizers that put so many bars, because that's what we've done the math on, one bar per X amount of people, and that's what we need. And then I walk around the floor and there's a ton of exhibitors that they're serving their own alcohol, and sometimes better choices, or food, or insert whatever. I picked
Right.
alcohol, and so that's where, like, show management would say, like, hey, let's figure out, like, how many people are already having bars. Like, there's not more people. Can we reduce our spend on food and beverage for the reception, because it's made up by the exhibitors that are doing it. So now
Good point.
we're reducing our spend there, and we could put it towards something else. But that's, I think, we have sometimes we get caught in these, like, we need this, and we don't think about what's being provided in that. And then you could either cut some of that savings onto other things or better the experience.
Well, and this is one of my pet peeves, but let's spend $50,000 or even more than that on, some kind of big headline entertainment for the last night party or whatever. And it's like, okay, realistically, how much value is that bringing you, rather than spending that say $50,000 to actually invest in something that is going to make your show better, make your exhibitor experience better, make your attendee experience better.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I don't, and I know show organizers always use the excuse of, oh, we bring in these big names because it gets people to register. And it's like, have you really done, everybody
Yeah.
talks about data. Have you really done the data on that to see,
Yeah.
ask how many people are signing up because, oh boy, this band is playing at the event versus, oh, we're coming for the education. Oh, we're coming to walk the show floor. Oh, we're coming for networking,
And if it's that less than 1% would be my guess across every show. If
Yeah,
that less than
exactly.
1% is coming because you've got some big music act, you're in the wrong business and they're coming to the wrong show.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, especially if you're in Chicago or Vegas or, Orlando or wherever, there's other entertainment to be had locally. I mean, why should you pay thousands of dollars to have this headline entertainment when there's other stuff that can be happening in the city that people can go to? You don't need to be, like you said, spend the money on an actual show floor networking, experience rather than, oh, let's all go to this big concert.
Because we always have.
Yeah.
Those are the reasons that I always hear. It's like, well, but we've always had a headliner. So what?
Yeah. So what?
But
Why?
you said it, and I think this leans into that conversation of I think we also forget what people find valuable, and even in sponsorships, I see more and more that like the thing that we think as the show organizer, the exhibitor or sponsor company finds valuable, it's not any longer, or it
No.
was, or it's changed. And so sometimes dusting off those, like, I think we all produce the prospectus or the PDF, or we put them all online, we sell them all online, whatever it may be. We rinse and repeat, but we don't know if is that really the value. Is that what they want? Are some of these items? And I'm finding that the more people sit down and say some of these things we've spent money on aren't the actual value that our sponsors are looking for. And so not only have
Yeah.
we spent money on it, it's not delivering what we think is valuable. And that's hard to sit down and audit a sponsorships, program and say, hey, are these working for you anymore?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting you bring that up. We won't go down the rabbit hole of sponsorship today, but I'm actually working on something that's going to help with that. So
So stay tuned is what you're
so
saying.
stay
Okay.
tuned. Stay tuned. More to come on that. But so let's shift gears a little bit. You also had an article about what's hot and what's not. So, we got a few minutes left here. So just kind of let's hit on what are some of the things that you see that are really hot right now?
Well, I mean, we've sort of talked a little bit about it. I think there's this concept of experience, and I feel like I'm
Mm-hmm.
tired of saying that, but
But
it's
but
really.
not enough people have got the message yet.
Oh, well, that's it. I mean, I worry at moments that we tend to again recreate what's easy, and I see
Mm.
it on the exhibitor side. It's like, there's that shift in, like, you don't have to have a big booth to do something interactive. You don't have to have, I mean, I'm not trying to shrink size of booths, show manager could kill
No.
me, but you
Well, and I've worked with I love working with the little 10 by 10 and 10 by 20-foot exhibitors because we can get so creative. And some of my clients have done some really cool experiential activations in a 10 by 10 or 10 by 20. So you don't have to have this big mega booth in order to have an experience and to do something creative and memorable. So I wish that exhibitors could just, put that out of their minds that, oh, we can't possibly compete. I mean, classic example, I remember one of my exhibits that I did at it was just a small regional conference. There were only a few hundred attendees, but I actually had my little 10 by 10 space right next to a household name brand company. And because I did pre-show marketing and I had some creative activations and some gamification elements, I had people, sometimes I would have a line of people waiting to talk to me, while the household name next to me, they just stood and talked to each other because,
yeah.
everybody knew who they were. They didn't really go and talk to them. Maybe they came by to get their free giveaway, but it's like, do something, activate, make it fun, make it engaging in your booth, and you will get people in.
Create an event within the event and within your
Yes.
booth. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing too, is sometimes we've done some analysis when you overlay a heat map with a lead scan map, and you'll see, like, there's this, little company in the back with a 10 by 10 with more lead scans than the big anchors up front. And it just proves that, like, yeah, of course, it'd be a lot easier with the big anchor in the front and that kind of budget. But here's a person with a 10 by 10 in the back of the hall that outperformed lead scanning than you did. So,
Yeah.
and I think it's also funny what you talk about. It kind of made me think about, as I recall back to the article, was blurring that line between show floor and education. Your example exactly, like, hey, like the more show organizers, you just think of that as that blurring those lines, like we shouldn't separate that because it creates that barrier for attendees.
Yeah. Well, you had a great example you shared in that article from the American Society of Landscape Architects. So tell that story real quick.
Well, I mean, yeah, they not only use their show floor for education, they use their entire city. So they do adult field trips, they call them. I mean, literally, so not only do they take their education in the show floor, they take them on the road, and then they work with the sponsors and say, hey, for them, it's like, we're going to go by this park and your benches are there. Would you like to sponsor this? You know,
I
um,
love that.
I mean, so it's like, again, it's thinking that, like, they also do show floor tours, and so they allow some exhibitors to do credited sessions, and as long as it's not a pitch, we all know that. I think that's always the hesitation, right? Oh my goodness, someone's going to do a pitch. Always a risk, 100%. I know some medical and things like that can't do it, but when you start to think about those things, that's where people get exciting. Like, and personally, I got to be honest, a lot of times some of the exhibitors and sponsors on most of these show floors have far more in-depth and exciting content because they work across all your industry, whatever it is. They're
Hmm.
working with so many people, they bring such unique perspective.
Yeah, well, and I think you're doing an educational session where it's, a vendor, an exhibitor that has one of their clients and they do it like a case study as the presentation. That I think attendees find fascinating because, they're connecting with the story of the example that's being shared. They're seeing how this exhibitor helped this person, but it's like a soft pitch. It's not in your
Well,
face.
yeah, and back to ASLA, they built this dog park over time, and the dog park was really sort of like an interactive experience, and not just like a pet, like not a puppy place. I mean, that those are still popular,
Right. Yeah.
but this was like a dog agility park. And then one company sponsored it, and what they realized, then they went out, and what I love is they came back and said, we got to raise the cost on this. Like, this takes up a big place on our floor. And then they said, the company was like, hey, look, that's the top of our budget. So they said, can you identify other sponsors? So now they found other non-competing sponsors to further build out this dog park, and
I
they do
love it.
education and agility. They've raised more revenue. And by the way, every exhibitor, I booked that show, every exhibitor wants to come near be the dog park. And so it's like, that's, again, we blur these lines that, like,
Yeah.
you can get educated anywhere at our event. It's not just always in a classroom behind seats.
Yeah. I love that idea. I did an article uh, several years back for TSNN about the not sure I'm going to remember, but it was like emergency physicians show. And they have like a ER basically on the show floor, the same kind of thing. So it's an experience. People can actually see all the products, all the items that the exhibitors would be showcasing in a live real world setting. And I think almost every show could do that. And you probably remember the article I did a long time ago about what shows could learn from IKEA.
Yeah.
You talk about controversial, boy. I had a lot of people come at me for that one, but it's like, think about it. What does IKEA do? They have rooms. They have like a whole little mini apartment set up with all the tags of here's all the products and here's what we used and blah, blah, blah. But it's a real world example. I think virtually every show could be doing that on some level. And it's just, I think it's a totally missed opportunity.
Yeah, I was at Coverings recently, and it's 8 miles of tile from all over the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of those very large scale booths. I mean, our full scale homes, down to details that were there's a bar of soap when you built the bathroom and you saw the tile, like they didn't leave any detail, and you walked in these spaces and you forgot. At moments I forgot I was at the Orlando Convention Center. I just, because I
Yeah.
was in a house and I was
Yeah.
feeling the tile, and just everything was built around that. Now again, those are, like you said, every show could do it. Scale it to whatever you do and think about those experiences, because that's what was memorable. Like, I completely forgot I was at a trade show for a moment, and it was
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. Well, and I was in a booth like that at the kitchen and bath industry show this year, and they actually did a booth tour. And so they led you through, and because they were doing it that way and it wasn't just a self-guided thing, they pointed out things that I probably wouldn't have picked up on just, as an attendee wandering through. But it just, like you said, it made it so real, so vivid. I could see, oh, I get how this product would work in the real world. And, it's just, it takes that to a whole different level. And I think, again, that's blurring the line between exhibiting and educating. And I think if more exhibitors and more show organizers teamed up on those kind of concepts, I mean, we could transform the whole concept of going to a trade show.
Well, and you're going to often find out, I think it's where sometimes as show managers, we got to sit down with the education team, because they're hearing what are the topics, what are the things that are, hot in the industry, because you may not be, I mean, a lot of people that work in show management, are not in the industry. So when you sit down with the education team, look at the program, look at the schedule, look at what people are talking about, because can that translate? What one is something missing from the show floor because the topic, like, are there exhibitors that align to that? Can you do something? I mean, I'll laugh about ASLA again, but it's just top of mind since we're telling some good stories from there. There is a huge rivalry between bricks and pavers. Only found this out when you talk to education managers, that, like, there is a big rivalry. And so, that's an education component where both, brick people are trying to tell you why they're, well, that eventually translated into an experience on the show floor of, like, let's pit bricks against pavers. But that's that
Oh,
conversation with the education team, that if you don't know, these are the things that are hot topics. How is that translating to your show floor? Can you make experiences? So yeah, but again, we just don't sit down with the education team sometimes and look at our schedule and think, how does that translate or doesn't translate by what we have on our show floor?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. I love that example of the bricks versus pavers, and finding those little hidden gems of what the topics are that you can enhance in all different kinds of ways. So,
Yeah. Well,
Rich,
and you go tell the brick paper there's more paver people, and those are the things that if you're looking to raise revenue, find
yeah,
out those
there you
things.
go. There you go. They're gonna compete to who can spend the most and have the biggest presence on the show floor.
Exactly.
So, Rich, I love all of these great ideas, and we always have so much fun. And thank you for coming on and sharing, so everybody could hear what, the conversations that you and I have behind the scenes. So what's the best way for people to connect with you?
You can look at my-events.com. That's my day job. I also, richvallaster.com is my website for speaking and engagements and topics. My calendar is always there. I love to talk this topic and always appreciate our conversations, our opportunities. My goal, luckily, my job isn't, I don't do sales. I do any of that. My job is to spend time out in the industry and share back those good knowledge and work with great folks like you. So I appreciate it.
Well, that pretty much sums it up. You have like the coolest job to get to go out and just learn things and then share things. So, and I kind of do some of that too. So, anyway, thank you so much for being my guest today. And we look forward to hearing what's hot and what's new things are coming down the pike. So stay tuned, everybody.
Thanks again.
If you enjoyed today's episode and would like more, you can subscribe to the Trade Show Insights podcast and automatically receive future episodes on your chosen device. Simply search for Trade Show Insights in Apple, Spotify, or virtually anywhere else that podcasts are found, then click the subscribe button. Trade Show Insights is protected by the Creative Commons copyright license. You may feel free to share this recording with colleagues or embed it on your own blog as long as it's shared in its entirety and is not used for commercial purposes. To learn more, please see the link in the sidebar of the show notes at tradeshowinsights.com. Well, that's it for this episode of Trade Show Insights. Be sure to check out our show notes and archives at tradeshowinsights.com. You can also connect with me using the social media links or the contact page on the site. I'm Marlis Arnold. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next time for more tools to improve your exhibit results.